Thank you for joining us, everyone. This is the last New York City global now virtual town hall for Yale Alumni Nonprofit Alliance. My name is Rachel Littman. I'm the executive director, Saybrook class of 1991, for those Saybrugians out there. We're pleased to hand this over to Ken Inadomi, our founder and president, in a few minutes. Just wanted to say thank you to everyone for joining us and staying with us on this journey. We couldn't have done this without you, and I hope you found solace and comfort and community in the YANA network. Really happy to be wrapping up this tumultuous year with some terrific speakers that talk about democratizing access to education, something we all care and are interested in. So without further ado, Ken, I'm going to hand the microphone over to you.
Terrific. Thanks, Rachel. And everyone, I guess our last town hall of the year. We're actually mapping out 2021 programming. So if any ideas bubble up, and if you think it could be a great topic for either a conversation, a virtual town hall, a webinar, anything at all, please feel free to submit it. We can't necessarily guarantee it, but we'll definitely consider it. So tonight we've got democratizing services in education. And leading off, we have Cara McClellan, who is an attorney with the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, which is the leading organization that is fighting the racial injustice. And Cara is also involved in the current Department of Justice lawsuit against Yale on affirmative action. And she's going to try to unpack that and really crystallize some of the issues and the implications for Yale and for people of color. After Cara, we're going to have founders of two nonprofits that are looking at the pre-college students, underserved pre-college students that, and how they're providing services in both writing and in college prep for them. But first, we're going to look at the affirmative action case, and we're delighted to have Cara McClellan. Cara, take it away.
Well, thank you. I'm so glad to be here. I am also Yale College 2010, YLS 2015, and a former member of YANA when I lived in Philadelphia. So an organization, and obviously the university is close to my heart. So I should say that the Legal Defense Fund is not yet involved in the challenge to Yale's race-conscious admissions policy. We represent students and alumni in the Harvard lawsuit, and we have been involved in every challenge to affirmative action or race-conscious admissions policies that has gone to the Supreme Court. So we are watching this case develop very closely. And we did a FOIA. Our involvement at this point is that we've done a FOIA to the Department of Justice after it sent its letter of finding of discrimination to Yale, with a series of questions really to probe what was the basis for this finding of discrimination. The Supreme Court has said over and over again that race can be considered as one of many factors in admission so long as it is done in a narrowly tailored way. And typically, when the Department of Justice does an investigation and finds that there is discrimination in a letter, in a finding letter like one that was sent to Yale, it is a very long, detailed letter going through all of the basis for a finding and going through all of the evidence. And that was not what we saw in the letter that was sent to Yale. And in fact, as anyone who was following the response of the university, found out in the university statement, the investigation actually was not complete in that the university had not yet provided all of the information or all of the data that the Department of Justice had requested for its investigation. And so our question was, what was the basis for the finding of discrimination? It is not the case that any consideration of race is discrimination, and it is not the case that race-conscious admissions is discrimination. So where is the basis for finding that discrimination was occurring? It didn't say in the letter. And then after we did our FOIA, the lawsuit was filed, and we read through the very long complaint that was filed against Yale, and still there was not clear evidence that was laid out that was the basis for the finding of discrimination. And so I thought what I would do is talk a little bit about the Harvard lawsuit, what are the similarities or not between the Yale and Harvard lawsuit. And then I really hope that this will be a discussion. I'm happy to answer any questions. Obviously we don't know completely what it is that DOJ attorneys who are involved in this are thinking, or what is, some of the basis that they may be relying on. All we know is what they put forward. And so far, it's not clear that there was a basis for finding discrimination, in the letter, or a basis for filing a lawsuit at all. There's nothing in terms of the evidence that they've shown so far that would support that. So if it's okay, is it possible for me to share my screen? I wanted to just start out with a short video clip to provide some context for first the Harvard lawsuit, because I think that will also shed some light on what's going on in the Yale lawsuit so far.
Cara, you should be able to. Why don't you give it a shot? I don't see it restricted, so let me know if that doesn't work for you.
Okay, great.
Beautiful.
So let me know if you have any issues seeing my screen. But are you all able to see? Just give me a thumbs up if you're able to see my, okay. So, as I said, clearly the Supreme Court has repeatedly reaffirmed that colleges may consider race as one of many factors in admission, so long that it is narrowly tailored. What that means is that race must be a factor, but not a determinative factor, and that there has to be a compelling interest in fostering diversity, and that would be the basis for the university determining that they will consider race. So I wanted to begin with this clip that is a little bit of background on Ed Blum. Could you all either wave or give me a thumbs up if you already know who Ed Blum is? I just want to have a sense of what people's, okay. So he is a former stockbroker who has started financing different cases challenging civil rights policies in different contexts. So he actually was one of the architects behind Shelby County, which was the lawsuit where the Supreme Court struck down the Voting Rights Act or essentially gutted the Voting Rights Act. And he was also more recently involved in Fisher v. University of Texas, which was another challenge to race-conscious admissions. And after the Fisher 2 decision came out saying yes, again, for the fourth time, in 40 years, it is, the Supreme Court ordered, it is, again, constitutional to consider race as one of many factors. And at that point, Ed Blum said this, and I'll let the clip speak for itself.
I just let you know that I can't hear it. I don't know if anybody else can hear, but I cannot.
Oh, I apologize. Can others not hear? Is the sound not?
Yeah, I was trying to myself.
Oh, okay. Let me just.
I think, Cara, when you share the screen, I think you have to select to use the sound of the computer. When
Got you.
initially
Okay,
share the screen.
so
There's a
share,
little-
and then let's see. You would think by now I would be an expert at Zoom sharing. I end up so often using different platforms like Teams that I think I'm getting reoriented each time. So maybe I will come back to this if oh, here we go, audio. Okay, if I can't quickly figure out how to do this, I'll just maybe come back to it at the end. It's not critical.
When you select to share, it should be like in the bottom left, if I remember correctly. I can't.
Okay. In the share in the bottom left. Oh, share computer sound. Got it. Sorry about that. So let me see if I can start us at the beginning, and just let me know if you
That's the goal
can't hear now.
of these lawsuits, is to eliminate the consideration of race. That's the goal of these lawsuits, is to eliminate the consideration of race or ethnicity in applying. So, I needed plaintiffs. I needed Asian plaintiffs, and finding plaintiffs to challenge the Ivy League admissions policies, Harvard in particular, is not an easy thing to do. So I started, designed 3 websites: harvardnotfair.org, UNC, University of North Carolina, notfair.org, and UW-notfair.org, University of Wisconsin.
So I just play that to give the context, because obviously there has been an attempt on behalf of Ed Blum and Abigail Fisher to present the Harvard lawsuit as if it is entirely distinct from Fisher v. Texas and the issues that were presented in Fisher v. Texas that the Supreme Court has already clearly ruled on. But this is his attempt to recruit clients and presentations that he was going around and making. And he makes pretty explicit there that rather he was looking to bring the same issue before the court, but frame it as on behalf of Asian American applicants. So Ed Blum and Abigail Fisher founded an organization called Students for Fair Admissions. He is the president, she is the chair along with him, and her father is the 3rd member, and together they were the founders of Students for Fair Admissions, and that became the plaintiff in the Harvard lawsuit. It's an organization that claims to represent Asian American applicants who were denied admissions to Harvard. Since filing the Harvard lawsuit, they also filed a lawsuit challenging admissions at University of North Carolina. That trial just wrapped up last week. And the reason that this is relevant also for our discussion of the Yale lawsuit is what has happened in the last couple months since the Yale lawsuit was filed. Originally it was filed by the Department of Justice. And as we got closer and closer to the election and it became unclear whether there was going to be a change in administration and whether, in a world in which there is a Biden administration, would the Biden administration withdraw this lawsuit or continue pursuing it? There was some talk about, well, Students for Fair Admissions intervene in this case. And in fact, they did. They've now intervened in the Yale lawsuit. And that motion has not been granted yet. There's going to be a hearing on December 8th in which the judge will consider Students for Fair Admissions motion to intervene in the Yale lawsuit. If they're granted intervention, it's possible that if a Biden administration does withdraw the lawsuit against Yale, Students for Fair Admissions, depending on the timing of everything, could continue the lawsuit and they would become the plaintiff instead of the Department of Justice. It's also possible that they could not be granted intervention, but later on decide to refile the lawsuit, essentially refile the Department of Justice's claims on behalf of Students for Fair Admission. That would be a little bit dubious, right? Because it's not their data, it's not their information that is the basis for the lawsuit, but it's possible that they could do that. So we're really, all of this is happening in real time right now. We don't know exactly how all of this is going to turn out, whether there's going to continue to be a live case or not, whether they're going to be granted intervention or not. But certainly the office where I work, the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, and also the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, which has also been very involved in these challenges to affirmative action. We're monitoring this very closely. We are talking to students and alumni about whether there is an interest in being involved in this case. And in a world in which it does continue, in which Students for Fair Admissions does intervene and the lawsuit goes on, We want to make sure that if there's an interest in alumni and in students in being involved in this lawsuit and having their voices be heard directly, that we are positioned to intervene as well and to represent them. The intervention of students and alumni in the Harvard case was critical. The district court opinion and the Harvard lawsuit, which it was a very thorough 140-page opinion, repeatedly relied on the testimony of students and alumni who we represented, who spoke about their experiences as students at Harvard, how the diversity on campus benefited them, shaped their educational experience, and for alumni also, continued to impact them long term. And this was really powerful because we represented 25 Harvard student and alumni organizations. The organizations had graduation years that span at least 7 decades, came from all different backgrounds, Asian American, Black, Latinx, Native American, and white, many different interests, but all were united on this front. And it was incredibly powerful for the court to hear directly from them through our briefs and through their testimony at trial. And it was also something that the First Circuit really grappled with on appeal. We presented arguments on appeal, and the First Circuit upheld the district court's opinion about a month ago now, almost, and relied a lot on the testimony that was presented by student and alumni groups. And I think one of the things that was most powerful about this was it was diverse students coming together as a coalition and saying, this is not going to be a wedge issue for us, and no one else is going to speak for us. We are going to speak directly about our own experiences and make sure our voices are heard and considered at trial. And so, that if there does continue to be a lawsuit against Yale, I think that is essential to be in the record. And obviously people are speculating that either one of these cases could go all the way to the Supreme Court. And the key part about having student and alumni voice at the district court level is it means that it's something in the record forever that all of the appellate courts that consider it afterwards will have to really grapple with, right? They're not just going to have to look at disparities in test scores alone, but rather understand the context of students' experience, students' applications, and students' lived realities on campus and how diversity has impacted them, who are most directly impacted and have most at stake, which is, at the end of the day, students, right? So that's just kind of some background on where we are, but I really would love to have more of a discussion and answer questions, or hear from you all about, are you following this case? What is of interest for you?
Can I ask a question? I did follow the case and I read the opinion. What I found difficult to accept is that the Asian students got lower personality score from the admissions officers. It's just to clarify that I am for affirmative action. I don't think this case should defeat the policy, but I do feel that there is some evidence of discrimination against Asians in that particular case, and I don't know what you think about that.
Yeah. So let me just, so that everybody is on the same page, talk about what the personality score is. So what came out through testimony during trial is a lot of information about Harvard's admissions process. So essentially, they score applicants in 4 categories: academic, extracurricular, athletic, and personal and school support ratings is the 4th category. And that is what the media and what Students for Fair Admissions called the personality score. It's not actually a scoring of someone's personality. What Harvard refers to it as is the personal and school support rating. And essentially it is a rating about how are you going to contribute on campus. And it's based on counselor recommendations from your high school. And sometimes the interview can impact it, and other basically school support statements about the kind of contribution that they think the student has made on campus in high school, and what they're likely to do at the college in terms of leadership roles and everything. This is undoubtedly the most concerning part of what was presented at trial, which is that there was evidence that Asian American applicants were rated lower on the personal and school support rating than other applicants as a group overall. The disparity was not statistically significant, right? We're talking about a very small percentage score in terms of the difference that different groups are getting on average on the personal and school support rating. And obviously there's also disparities in all of the categories, right? There's racial disparities in the academic rating. They're not for Asian American applicants, but for Black and Latino applicants. There's disparities in the extracurricular and the athletic, and also in the personal and school support rating. But this was the category where Asian Americans were, in a not statistically significant way, but in a way, scoring lower than other applicants. And so the question is why, and was it because of discrimination on Harvard's part? What the district court judge found was that there was no evidence suggesting that it was based on discrimination, because the personal and school support rating was often based on teacher or counselor recommendations. So to connect, what they're rating as lower to an action by Harvard, the court found that you couldn't make that connection because they're basically going off of these recommendations and then assigning a score, as opposed to like rating the students themselves through recommendations. But it still is a troubling question, right? Like even if it is coming from school counselors or teachers, why are Asian American applicants on average getting lower rating, from their school counselors or from their teachers, and is bias affecting that? And it's a real question that we struggled with and that our clients struggle with, because first of all, we would be the first to say that there is absolutely implicit bias and other kinds of racial bias that is affecting all applicants. Asian American applicants face bias, Black applicants, Latinx applicants are all facing different types of systematic bias in their schools that affects how teachers interact with them, how counselors interact with them, how, across the board, how they're treated within K through 12 education, in addition to like segregation and the other institutional racisms that impact students' opportunity and experience. But for us, the question was, if there is bias that's happening in the personal rating, how do you address it, right? And as someone who does race discrimination cases and all that we do in my office is bring racial bias cases, we always are looking for a remedy that is going to directly address the discrimination that's happening. And when you look at what the plaintiffs and Students for Fair Admissions are seeking, to me, it really makes clear that they're not actually concerned about discrimination, because what they're seeking, if you look at the end of their complaint and in all of their filings, is they ask for an injunction ending any consideration of race at all, whatever that means. I can't even imagine what that means exactly, because race is in all different parts of an applicant's essay, and so requiring an applicant to hide that entirely so that it can never be seen or considered, you could imagine that could be something very extreme. I don't know what that would mean, but what they're not seeking is a remedy that would actually address racial bias through implicit bias training, through systematic changes in the admissions office, through some training of counselors at high schools, through any of the things that we seek in our cases when we feel there's discrimination and we try to directly address it. Our solution is never, so now you must be blind to race all around you in the world always and forever, but rather through this race conscious solution, this is how you should directly address the bias that's happening.
I agree that there's no doubt about the motive of Ed Blum, and I don't think the Chinese students should associate themselves with him. But I actually am bothered a little bit by Yale's response to the legal or the department's complaint about the racial discrimination and saying we're not going to change our practice at all. Because actually after the Harvard lawsuit, they actually changed their instruction to their admissions officers and interviewers about how they should evaluate an interviewee, talking about they should not take modesty as something negative or something like that. I remember reading somewhere about they're changing their instruction. So for me, for Yale to say we're not going to change anything, that's a little bit too immodest. That there are always ways to improve. It's not a hard science. It's a soft approach that there's always ways to improve, to tailor your approach to better achieve your goal. So for me to read Yale's response saying we're not going to change at all, that's to me, it's not a very good response.
Yeah, I just want to clarify, and I should have said this earlier, some differences between the Yale lawsuit and the Harvard lawsuit, because I think it goes to your point. So one is that the Harvard lawsuit, the complaint was filed, the allegations are on behalf of Asian American applicants, saying that Asian American applicants are being discriminated against. The DOJ's complaint does not say that. What the DOJ's complaint says is that white applicants and some Asian American applicants are being discriminated against. So it's very explicitly on behalf of white applicants, and against the way they explicitly frame it in the lawsuit is against Black and Latino applicants who are underqualified. And the entire basis of the case is they're saying that systematically Black and Latino applicants who are not qualified are getting admitted to Yale. That's explicitly their argument. In a lot of ways, what they're putting forward is more explicitly racist than the Harvard lawsuit is. But the reason I said some Asian American applicants is they also, and this was honestly shocking for me to read the Department of Justice taking this position, but they have a footnote where they explain that Asian American does not refer to Southeast Asian Americans. I don't know what gives them the power to determine who is and who is not Asian American, but they literally say, you know, if you are Laotian, if you are Vietnamese, if you are, they go through a whole list of Southeast Asian American subgroups and say none of those for the purposes of this complaint are considered Asian American because it doesn't further their argument of who is being discriminated against. And they literally separate. So it's not only, you know, to some extent, many people have described the Harvard case as not only treating Asian American applicants as a monolith, but also creating this wedge issue. In the Yale case, we literally have an attempt by the Department of Justice to pit Asian American subgroups against each other, which is something different than we saw in the Harvard case, and is obviously incredibly concerning for our government to be writing cases like this.
Yeah, that is definitely politically motivated. It's not something.
Hey, Cara, if I can, there was a question by Cheryl Carter that I think is really provocative. I know that you've been meeting with Yale students currently. Maybe you can share some of the feedback you're getting from the Yale students and how that's impacted your thinking. Yeah.
So before we even reached out to any of the students, they started reaching out to us, which actually, you know, was similar to what happened in Harvard in terms of there were students who really wanted to be involved in the case and started reaching out to us and ultimately convinced us to become involved in the case. But the students we've spoken to are incredibly outspoken. I don't know if you all have seen any of their statements already, but across the board, not only cultural organizations or Dwight Hall, but also Yale College Counsel explicitly reached out to us very early on and said that they wanted to take an explicit position in support of race-conscious admissions because of how much diversity was benefiting their leadership and how they saw it as in the interest of the student body. And so across the board, we've been hearing from students who want to be involved in this case, who want to share their own experience because they, feel like they have the most important interest in this case and they want to speak for themselves rather than having their stories told by others. Consistent with in the Harvard case, we've heard from a lot of Asian American student groups who want to be involved and who want to speak out on this issue rather than having, Students for Fair Admission speak for them. And in particular, because of the difference in this case that I just was describing, we've heard from Southeast Asian student groups who are especially interested in speaking out on this issue and being involved in this case. So far, they've done a lot of talking to press and speaking out through comms, through different statements and organizing. But I think that they ultimately, if the case does go forward, are interested in being represented and actually having a meet status in the case so that they can testify and present their own evidence in the lawsuit.
Terrific. Cara, we could go on forever with you, and we definitely want to invite you back as this case develops. But I want to get on to the other two speakers, but thank you so much.
Thank you so much, and please feel free to reach out. I hope we can continue to have a partnership on this. Right.
We're going to share your contact information if that's okay with our attendees.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, so our next speaker, who's also looking at democratizing access to educational opportunities is Kate Ruther. Kate's been a former Spotlight presenter. She is the founder and the executive director of Uptown Stories, which teaches writing and gives writing opportunities to underserved and under-resourced kids in Manhattan. Kate herself is a marvelous writer. Can't wait to hear her update. Kate, take it away.
Thanks so much, Ken. Can everyone hear me okay? Awesome, great. So I started Uptown Stories really because with my own experience as a teacher in the public schools. I'd been teaching in the public schools for about 15 years, and I've always loved teaching. I love working particularly with middle schoolers. I'm one of those weird people that loves to work with middle schoolers. And I just found that there was this huge disconnect between how writing was being taught in schools and how writing was taught to writers, how writers approached writing. For myself as a writer, it was this place of freedom and expression and autonomy, and really felt like something that belonged to me and was like a pure expression of my inner self. Whereas the writing that I was asking my students to do was very controlled. So almost all the work that particularly middle schoolers do around writing is 5-paragraph essays. If any of you have a middle schooler or maybe remember your middle school days, you've got that hamburger essay with the 2 pieces of bread and the meat in the middle, and each paragraph has to have an example and each paragraph has to have a quote. And my kids were just terribly, terribly bored and frustrated with this format. It didn't make sense to them. It didn't feel personal. It wasn't fun. And so I was trying to stuff in any creative writing that I could do in kind of like the corners of my, my classroom time. And when I was actually on maternity leave, I sort of had this question, what would happen if we asked kids to write for themselves? Instead of asking them to write an assignment, what if we gave them the freedom to write what they wanted to write? The way that we ask writers to write what they want to write. What would they write? Anything if they weren't getting a grade? And Uptown Stories was really born out of that question. So we are based up in Washington Heights, and we typically are serving children ages 7 to 17. We offer classes in all kinds of writing that I would call real world writing as opposed to school-based writing. So fiction writing, poetry, screenwriting, playwriting. We had a songwriting class. We had a game writing class actually recently. We also have thematic classes. We had a class called Real News, as opposed to fake news. We had a class called Monsters Are Us, because kids love to create their own monsters. We have a class called Girls Rising, which is just for girls or people who identify as a girl. And these classes are intentionally small, unlike many of your public school settings. So the classes are capped at 14 students. And all of the teachers in our program are practicing writers or artists in their field. So something that you may or may not have thought about is that a lot of the people who go into teaching for English are readers. They love to read, but they don't necessarily love to write themselves. And that kind of discomfort or unfamiliarity can actually force teachers to kind of rely even more on those firm structures like the 5-paragraph essay. Whereas all of the teachers that we have are, we have a graphic novelist who's got a great comic book career. We have a young adult author who's coming out with a new book this fall. Our poetry teacher is actually not only a poet, but she's in 3 rock bands, so she's like a literal rock star. And the point of these workshops is to really get kids to enjoy writing, to feel like they themselves are capable of writing whatever they want, that they don't have to be told what to write, that the ideas can come from them. And I think that this is really important, particularly for kids whose stories and voices have not been given that kind of attention and validation. And Washington Heights is a genuinely diverse community. So we've got wealthy families and families who are really, really struggling, particularly now during COVID. And one of the challenges that we were thinking about is how can we make a space in this community for all of these children, right? Because something that I found very frustrating myself as a teacher is that in a public school setting, resources to serve students that we would really like to. My first year as a public school teacher, I had to steal furniture out of the trash from a school that was closing down because we didn't have enough chairs. And that's the kind of thing that teachers are doing all the time, paying out of pocket for their own supplies. Whereas the private schools have, these amazing facilities and these amazing resources, but there simply aren't enough seats for all of the children out there. And the children who are the lucky recipients of scholarships often don't really integrate into those communities. So you have that kind of dynamic of all the scholarship kids sitting separately at their own table in the lunchroom. So one facet that I think really distinguishes Uptown Stories is our program is a pay what you can program. So we have a suggested full tuition, but 85% of our families pay reduced tuition. And what I think is really amazing about that is that we're not asking folks to give us their tax returns. We're not asking folks to fill out, a form describing their suffering or why, they're struggling. It's not a competition between the students like the way that a scholarship is. The idea is that if you want to be a part of this, we want you to be a part of this, and you as a family have to figure out, how much you're comfortable paying, how much makes sense for you. So we have families who pay as little as $2, and we have families who pay as much as $600. The average is about $250. And I think what's really meaningful about that is not only is it a fiscally responsible policy, tuition makes up about 50% of our annual budget, but it also really transforms what I would describe as the culture within the classroom. Because you don't have that distinction between, the scholarship kids and the full fee kids. None of the kids are aware of that. We've got kids coming from all different schools, from all different backgrounds, but that kind of economic difference is invisible to them. And so they're really able to come together as writers and enjoy the difference in perspective that they're able to give each other. Some other things I would love to tell you about, we, I would say in the before times, that's what the kids call it now. I don't know if that's made it into the adult lingo, but the kids talk about, you know, back in the before times, we would have a reading at the end of every semester at the Word Up Bookshop, which is a community-run bookshop on 168th in Amsterdam. And all the kids get to, you know, stand up and present a section of their story or their poem or their screenplay, much like real writers do. And then we also produce a paperback anthology containing all of their work from the semester. So I have one example here for you. These are rather large books. They're about usually 300 to 400 pages long. And they contain all of the stories, poems, screenplays, comics, and as well, you'll see at the end of the book, everyone gets a bio and a photo so that they are actually published authors by the time they leave our class. And these books are for sale at Word Up as well as on Amazon, you know, different strokes for different folks. They're in the Library of Congress. So, you know, this is real, you know, and I really think that what we're looking to do ultimately is to transform the publishing industry and to transform the way that these young people are thinking about writing. Because regardless of if they become, you know, full-time writers as a career, we need to inspire young people to trust in their imagination and to believe in their voices and to feel confident on the page. You know, even if they're going to be a scientist or a mathematician, they still need to be able to write persuasively and authentically. I've been doing this now. We incorporated in 2014, but I've been running these classes since about 2010. And we've had just over 1,700 students in that time. We've held about something else that I think is really unique about this project is that we are an intentionally local project, not trying to make a citywide project or a nationwide project. I'm really thinking about trying to do something that is, I say, inch wide, mile deep in Washington Heights. And the reason behind that is that I think that we can have a much bigger impact by working closely with a smaller number of students repeatedly, as opposed to trying to have a diffuse impact on a larger number of students. So many of the students in our program have been part of this program now for 6 or 7 years. They've taken, some of them as many as 12 workshops. The average is about 5. And about 60% of our teachers also live in the neighborhood. So we're really thinking about building something that is consciously local, because while I do feel that every child would benefit from a program like this, I think that, you know, downtown stories would look different because the children there are from that neighborhood and the teachers would be hopefully from that neighborhood. And so, you know, I'm really interested in kind of cultivating something that is somewhat antagonistic towards this idea of, you know, always constant growth and constant kind of, you know, nationalization or globalization. But I was hoping, I wanted to show you a really quick video, which was from our summer. You know, we made a transition, as many of us did, from in-person school to Zoom, although we're also doing a number of classes outdoors now in Fort Tryon Park. We decided that indoors was a little bit too risky for our teachers and we didn't want to force anyone to do that. But we had several teachers who were already teaching outdoors. And so we've continued with those programs. But this video that I'm going to share with you is actually from this summer. Let's see if I can do this correctly. It's not giving. Just give me a thumbs up if you can hear.
So it starts like this.
I will take you to the future, not the future you expect or want, but destiny is sealed. The year is 2066.
The land was full of different flowers, from snapdragons to daisies, you name it. There were a bunch of beautiful and exotic butterflies and birds. It smelled like a beautiful spring.
The world is in the midst of a zombie apocalypse. We follow a group of high school friends who have just broken up from a huge fight, who have to rekindle their friendship and work together in order to survive, realizing their good is infected or dead alone.
Everything was still. There I was looking at my hometown, people laughing, hugging, screaming. Man, I thought, if only I could go back in time to warn them about the storm.
We fought off the aliens and stole their technology and materials. Now, you know the history. Let's go to our last city of Earth.
I love you. Miko smiled at what Kana said. I'll see you soon, Kana said after. No, wait. Miko tried to reach out, but there was nothing.
We're like following all of them. That's all of their stories.
So I would love to just open this up if we have questions.
Kate, let me make
I'm
a
much happy.
suggestion. Yeah, Kate, let me make a suggestion. Let's because of the kind of the lateness of the hour, let's hear from Madeline, and then we'll take combined questions for both of the programs. Okay.
You want to ask you?
Great. So it's my pleasure to introduce now Madeline Kerner. Madeline's Yale class of 07. She's the co-founder and CEO of Matriculate. And the mission of Matriculate basically is to recognize the underserved and underrepresented pre-college students who maybe would never have a chance to apply to the best schools if not for that program. So Madeline, please take it away.
Thanks, Ken and Kate. It was great to hear more about Uptown stories. I'm looking forward to those questions too. So I lead Matriculate, as Ken mentioned, and Matriculate is an organization now about 6 years old that came into existence to address the fact that every year there are something like 35,000 students who have done everything you could possibly expect of a high school student: grades, academics, coming from low-income families, over half of whom, at least back in 2012 when this research first came out, weren't applying to any colleges that would be considered an academic match for them, despite the fact that those very institutions are both the places where those students are more likely to graduate on time and less likely to take on significant debt. And that with just a little bit of structure and support, sort of bridging that gap from high school to college, we know that those students are highly strategic and actually making much more informed choices to enable them to attend those high graduation rate institutions. And sort of looking at the map of where those students are across the country, they're really distributed in ones and twos in public high schools from coast to coast. And we looked both at this research, which came from an economist at Stanford, Caroline Hawksby, and also kind of overlaid our best understanding of the college access and success work. And as I'm sure many of you know, there's a tremendous amount of excellent work going on in this field, many organizations taking pieces of the puzzle. One thing that we observed is that most support was really pretty locally available, typically in person, and typically clustered around kind of the biggest cities across the country. And so in looking at those supports and where our students were showing up, there was not as much overlap as we might have wished. And so decided that this actually could be the kind of problem that could get solved. And there are many, frankly, harder things to do in college access and success. Frankly, students who need a lot more support. And yet there's also this group of students who have done everything we've ever asked of them and still aren't attending the kinds of colleges they frankly deserve to attend based on their track record and their academic success. So we decided to try an approach in which current undergraduates became virtual advisors, each with a small group of 3 or 4 high school students with whom they would work over the course of about a year and a half, from second semester junior year of high school through senior year of high school, providing the basic technical support through the process. They knew Common App in a way that unfortunately many local high school counselors have not, having just been through the process themselves, and many other important components, FAFSA and CSS, building balanced college lists. And perhaps more importantly, could actually show high school students what it can look and feel like to attend a high graduation rate college, both the upsides and also the challenges that can be present in those environments. And our hope had been to better prepare students to make informed and empowered decisions for themselves. So this was our tests now 6 years ago. And our hope was in building this type of approach and model that we could perhaps not serve all those students, but really build something highly scalable, relatively low cost, relatively nimble, and ultimately over time, really build a network of young people supporting one another all the way through the college process and also into college and beyond. So today we have about 800 current undergraduates, including about 70 Yalees, who've gone through 70 hours of training to become Matriculate advising fellows, currently serving nearly 3,000 high school students across the country, the majority of whom are in rural and suburban communities, the vast majority, nearly all of whom, have no other meaningful college supports. They might meet with their high school counselor once a year if they're lucky, if they have a high school counselor. Unfortunately, in many cases, they don't. And have built these relationships with Matriculate undergraduate advising fellows who serve as their coach, support, friend, who are available by text, video chat, phone, for quick questions, for substantial hour-long sessions following our curriculum, and to just kind of be on their team as they go through, certainly today, what is a deeply stressful process on any year. And in this moment, our students are facing barriers nobody has ever faced, I think, in this process before. So that's the kind of order of magnitude and the approach that we're taking. And so far, we're seeing our students both attending high graduation rate schools at significantly higher rates than we would have anticipated, given the research, persisting over 90%. Our first class just graduated in the spring, so we'll soon have kind of independent verification of our first graduation rate. And what we're seeing is that those networks of young people, once they meet each other, stick. Whether it's because we're asking them to stay connected or not, those connections are authentic, they're meaningful, they're forged over, like an hour a week for a year and a half in many cases, and just go beyond the kind of transactional college access related information. And for many students, far beyond into their college years. And we're beginning to observe even beyond that into the labor market. And ultimately, I think our hope and vision is that this slice of students is attending the kinds of institutions we know they will thrive in and that they deserve to attend. And that ultimately we begin to see some real change in who's showing up at these kinds of institutions. 80% of our students are students of color. The majority are first-gen students, and they're also, in many cases, coming from communities. I'm thinking of a student from Sulphur, Oklahoma, communities that are simply not particularly well represented at some of these high graduation rate institutions. So there are a couple of dimensions to the approach that we're taking, and we've got a lot of work ahead, but also very much heartened and inspired by the appetite that undergraduates have to really address this issue. So we've just finished recruiting a new group of 900 undergraduates from 15 colleges and universities across the country to become new Matriculate undergraduate advisors. And we saw almost 3,000 students put their hat in the ring for consideration to get to play this role. And I think, especially during COVID, having the opportunity to be part of a substantial process of engagement, of connection with somebody else who's coming behind you, a relationship that has always been a virtual relationship, leveraging virtual tools to sort of do something about the situation that we find ourselves in, I think has drawn a real appetite from undergraduates, and I think they are activated in this moment in a way that, you know, we've always believed they have been, but I think it's an even deeper engagement in problem solving and being part of a solution for students across the country. So maybe I will leave you with that in the interest of time, and wanting Kate to have some questions too, and happy to share more about what we're up to and where we're headed.
I don't want to hog the microphone, but if I could just, a lot of the space that nonprofits operate and your particular programs, both of you guys, is fulfilling gaps and needs in the system, whether that's education. In this case, we're really talking about education. You guys, what are your thoughts on how do we correct the problems that have caused the need for you? Not that we may not want extra college counseling and extra writing. It's really, we're talking about major systemic problems, that there are places that don't have college, and, you know, and there are the disparities really deep down underneath. So what are your thoughts on that, each of you, about, you know, why there are all of these disparities that create the need for your organization?
Yeah, I'll start, Kate, if that, and then hopefully you can take us home. I mean, you know, we know a lot of the answers to that question. I think structural racism is a key one. I think a lack of investment, in our case, in highly trained high school counselors who have reasonable caseloads and reasonable expectations that they can actually deliver on, is another. And, you know, that stems from a lot of choices and priorities we've set as a country and as states in education budgets, and in training and professional development. You know, I think there are a lot of solutions that are opportunities that go beyond direct service for those entities that aggregate student information or sort of aggregation points in the college application and decision-making process, to more intentionally ensure that every student has the support he or she needs to navigate through with a partner. And certainly we're not at a place across the country where there are enough advisors or additional supports for every student with need, but I think there's also a real inefficiency in those matches and how they're made. So I think that there are solutions to some of these challenges that might be easier to accomplish than kind of large scale shifts in, you know, our nation's priorities, our education priorities, and that's something we've been really interested in exploring.
Yeah, just to follow up, it's been interesting, you know, because at this very moment in COVID, for example, I have a friend who's teaching in a private school, and they're testing half the students and half the teachers every week. And they have completely retrofitted their filtration system. They have, you know, a scanner that everyone passes through. They have masks. They have, you know, separate classrooms. They have been able to offer in-person instruction because they have the resources and the will to do so. So, you know, I feel like it's not that these things are necessarily impossible, even under these intense circumstances. It's that, you know, right now, particularly, public school teachers are being asked to play the position of social worker, of, you know, counselor, of often they are providing food or clothing for their students. You know, we put so much responsibility for solving the problems of our society on our schools. And I think that we're asking them to do an impossible job often with simply not enough resources to do so. I mean, my own personal strategy has been to really pick an issue that is close to my heart, that I feel really passionate about, and to fight like hell on that issue. You know, I think that it's hard to solve the monstrous global problems as as an individual, it can be overwhelming, and some people can become kind of frozen by that, that overwhelming need. So I think that kind of finding your angle, finding your niche, finding your purpose in that, and then really, you know, digging in to that issue has been, for me, at least, something that we're seeing kind of community grow around. And, you know, the students who have been a part of the program who are older are coming back now as volunteers, you know, so that kind of self-sustaining support, I think, can really happen. But it's very hard when it's a huge system, particularly like a huge bureaucracy. It takes a lot longer to turn that ship.
Thank you for both for your answers. And I know we're past our time. And Cara, I didn't want to, you're not on my screen when it happened. You know, you're digging deep in these issues with the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, and we appreciate that. And I was just reflecting, when you sit at a hub and you see so many nonprofits tackling so many things, you start thinking, like, what else can we do to stop, you know, to start moving the ship. And we so appreciate the work that you guys are doing on the front lines. We want to keep supporting that, and I think it's really terrific. And I love your different approaches, nationalizing and staying local, and Cara for inviting you know, voices and staying involved in all the suits that are going on around the country. And I know we didn't get a chance to talk about the California situations, you know, with their affirmative action, you know, voter referendums and things like that, but we'll have to save that for another time. I'd love to have some more programs next year, really on education, I think, and particularly public education, and how that feeds into higher education access, which feeds into careers and higher education, you know, tertiary degrees, and who becomes teachers and who becomes, you know, we could go into this forever. We're all parts of the same puzzle. So I wanted to say thank you from us for you guys doing what you do on all these different levels. And I just wanted to make sure, were there any other questions from the audience before we wrap up? Because Ken apparently has his faulty connection. So I just wanted to close out here. Somebody, you can unmute yourself, very many of us. But if that's it, I just wanted to say thank you again. Stay safe, everyone. Thank you to our speakers. We'll see you if you can join us if you're interested in the arts. On Wednesday the 16th, we're doing a program about the many roles of arts and culture in a society. We're going to have religion, after-school music programs, adaptive dance programs for students and adults with autism and other physical disabilities, trauma healing from Yale, New Haven, and a bunch of other places, because we want to help support everybody who's in the arts and culture world as well. So please join us and stay safe and healthy, and best of luck, everybody, getting through 2020 on a positive note as we move into 21. So thanks very much, everyone. Have a good evening. We'll share the recording later if you need. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.